Hi everybody, it's Meteorologist Joe Cioffi. After a day of recharging myself, I took a little bit of a break today. The work with Hurricane Irma was extensive, and I just absolutely needed to step away for a little while to come back with a fresh head to deal with Hurricane Jose. And you can see right off the bat that Jose is, at this point, a very different looking system than Irma was. It is obviously not as well organized. There's all kinds of shearing going on with the outflow pattern from Irma, among other things. And the other thing that's obvious from this satellite loop is that it's not moving. It's stuck right along 70 west and somewhere just north of 25 north. It's hard to even pick out where the center is of this thing. It's probably right in the middle of the cloud mass, just only because of the fact that those first few pictures are a visible satellite and you can just really quick pick it out, or maybe is on more on the northern end. But the bottom line is that top winds on the 11 p.m. advisory were 85 miles an hour. You can see the Bahamas are to the west, and it's not going anywhere fast anytime soon. Now, I wanted to put a little context to what's going on and what's going to happen with this in the long range, and we're going to look at the upper air maps with Jose, and we're going to look at two GFS runs side by side here in particular. This was the model run from midday today, and basically what happens is we get this upper high that builds out in the Atlantic. In fact, I can even just let me add that image for you. And just give me 1 second. It's actually going to take us into a slightly earlier time frame here. The reason why Jose is not moving, and we talked about this yesterday, is the fact that Jose is basically in the middle of no man's land, atmospherically speaking. And this will show you why. This is the 84-hour GFS model run. This is going to be valid for Thursday evening. What's happening is that we have Jose building. There's an upper high that's building at the moment around Jose. You can see it here. It's like this giant finger in the Atlantic. It's a narrow ridge that runs from the African coast all the way west to the southeast coast of the United States. And it has Jose basically trapped in between Irma, or what's left of Irma, by Thursday, which will be a weak open trough in western Pennsylvania down into northern Mississippi. And you have another trough that's way out in the Atlantic. Right now, this trough is actually southeast of Newfoundland. But Jose's already missed that. If there was an opportunity for it to move out to sea, it would have done so. But by stalling out, it has already missed that. And this high is going to build over it, just basically kind of cradle Jose around it. So if you follow the clockwise flow around highs, this is at the upper layers of the atmosphere, so we're trying to get a feel for the steering here. Jose would move either west or west-northwest around the base of this ridge. Now, just to the north of the ridge, you've got a southwest flow that runs from the Carolinas out into the Atlantic, but it's trapped from there. It's not going to be able to get there. So it seems to me that now that it's stalled out, it's probably going to sit there for a little bit, maybe a day or so, and then as this upper high begins to build, it's going to start tracking off toward the west, and the Bahamas are right nearby. Okay, well, what follows that? Well, as it draws westward, of course, the atmosphere doesn't. It's not a static thing, and you have the changes that are going to happen as we go into the weekend. Now, that upper high, if you notice the difference from what we just showed you, kind of slides off to the east. It weakens on the eastern flank out in the tropical Atlantic. and Jose would probably rotate around it. Now, at this point, it would probably be moving northwestward or even northward, maybe. And that's where the rub lies, because there's a lot of uncertainty here regarding where this is going to wind up. Now, this was the run from this afternoon, and in a situation like this, you have also higher pressures in the upper layers of the atmosphere back over most of the eastern part of the United States. A setup like this would probably allow Jose to get pretty far to the west and perhaps be a threat for areas in the northern mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. But it's not that simple. And the reason is the late afternoon run, and the European actually showed this. If we show you the late afternoon run, and I'm going to see if I can slide this over. And hold on, I'm trying to maneuver. This is the late afternoon run, and I'm going to lay them side by side. If it lets me. And it's not letting me. It's being very evil right now. I'm trying to lay this side. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to lay these side by side. These two maps are actually for the same time frame, but they show. But what we're looking at are two different model runs. This is the one that I just showed you was the midday run. The other one is the late afternoon run, and they look almost the same, except for one important difference, and that is in the late afternoon run, there's a weak trough that's just off the coast of the Northeast. You can barely find a hint of it on the midday run, but on the late afternoon run, it's a little bit more evident. And what this would mean is that Jose would rotate up and around it through this weakness and possibly move out to sea. Okay? And to complicate matters even further, there's probably another possibility, and that is if this trough is very weak or non-existent, you've got this upper high to the west, you've got this upper high to the east. We just experienced with Irma what happens when an upper high is forecast to break down. It sometimes doesn't. The upper high with Irma remained so stubborn that we got that westerly track through the Florida Straits that wound up taking Irma right on the north coast of Cuba. Well, the other possibility is that you could wind up seeing perhaps more of this upper high being stronger and pushing this even further to the west. Now, I would probably rate that as the longer shot here, but the only thing that gives me pause is the fact that the corrections of the two hurricanes for the last couple of days has been west and south, west and south, west and south. And I want to at least have that in the back of my mind should we wind up having that issue show up again. Now, let me show you the forecast tracks from the hurricane models. The two outliers here are the ones that take it almost straight, well, not quite straight to the west, but the westerly component of motion is extremely dominant. And this would take it back through the Bahamas. You can see the vast majority of the models, the rest of them, take it northwest. A couple of them still have it going northwest out to day 5, and then they don't really go any further than that. But the ones that go longer go northwest, north, and then north, northeast. Some of them actually try to bend it back. But there's a spread here from the furthest east to the furthest west. I want to point out that the European is among those that are right now on the eastern side of this envelope of tracks. The GFS was one of the ones that was a little further west, but during the late day run, because of that weakness that it showed, went further east and basically offshore. If I had to make a specific forecast right now, which I'm not, but if I had to, I would probably lean toward the idea that it would go up and then out but I would be very nervous about that in lieu of everything that has been going on atmospherically lately. I should also point out that the UK Met model, which is the British model, was one of the models that early on was indicating a much more westerly track, even more so than the European did. The UK Met was early in the game, is one of the models that wants to go to the west. So this is something that we're going to have to pay attention to. We'll look at the new GFS run, which just is coming out now. And let me just stop for a moment there while that map loads. I just want to give a big hello to everybody that's on tonight at this ungodly hour of almost a quarter after midnight. So I just wanted to say hi, Patty Osgood, Danielle Dean, Alicia Williams, OKAG, Stan, PRJ Grudge, Corey, Scott. Greetings and salutations to you, sir. Hosea, Luigi is here. Christine is here. Isaiah, Dio, B-Villain. And I'm doing well, thank you. Greetings from Maryland and greetings back from Long Island. And Riri. So hi to everybody that is on board. Okay, so let's look at the new GFS model and see what that has to say. And it probably has to say many things. So let's set that up for you. I'm starting to get a little bit better with this switching back and forth, but it does have its moments where I seem to lose it a little bit. And we'll put up let's start with the Western Atlantic track, the Western Atlantic view. Okay, so you can see Irma, which is now a tropical depression, and we can just about kiss it goodbye at this point. And we have Jose sitting out east of the Bahamas. So I'm seeing this for the first time, by the way, so I'm seeing this with you. Okay, so here we go. So there we have it, the GFS. It's not at the first. Let me set it to the first frame so we don't get too. Let's set it. There's the first frame. Now you can see that the circulation of Irma, part of it extends out and has the stranglehold that it has on Jose, but that is breaking, and at this point you can see the hurricane moves, kind of drifts to the east overnight and into tomorrow, and then starts that westward and west-northwest motion around the upper high. And we're going to go out to 144 hours here. So the new GFS at this stage, which we are at Sunday afternoon, it's already moving north-northeast, and that's as far as it goes for the moment. So the new GFS is seeming to lean on the idea that that little trough is going to be enough to create a weakness, and you're not going to get this bridging between the two upper highs. So I'm going to go to a different view so we can look at it from the perspective of the East Coast. And we'll start this again. It may go off the frame briefly. So here's the view from the East Coast, up and down. And if you look to the northeast, in the northeast corner is a storm that's off the coast of Newfoundland. That's the one that Jose is missing and not being able to move out to the east and out to sea. So that's out of the picture. And then that ridge builds. And here we go. We actually have a few extra frames on this run, so we may take it further north. Still moving north-northeast at this point, and that's as far as we go, which is the 150-hour, well southeast of the Carolinas. I really would tend to think that that's the more favorable outcome here, not just meteorologically, but also from the standpoint of the folks who live along the East Coast, because after two major hurricanes, one in Texas, one in Florida, we don't want a third one. But this would argue that that we would probably not have to worry too much. Again, I want to be really careful. Whenever you have these looping situations, there are a number of things that can come into play, especially as we go deeper out into the long term. that the models may not be good at seeing at the moment. But we'll see what the upper air is telling us. And I'll take the North Atlantic view so we can look at the perspective of how all the upper high behaves and how the upper how the trough behaves. But see, there's Jose, the little circle in the middle, Irma, the big circulation to the northwest, the storm in Newfoundland to the northeast, and you can see how it's just kind of sitting in this hole that's right in the middle. And then as we move through time, it's still in that hole, but now watch the upper high that starts to build around it. You see how it comes out from the northwest Caribbean and moves over the Bahamas? It's going to cradle Jose right underneath it at this point. So this is the look that matches up with the maps that I showed you, the first map that I showed you, the 84-hour. And then as we move along, that upper ridge is still controlling it, but then it starts to shift a little further to the east and creates that opening, and moves up. There's just enough of a weakness here. And by the way, that trough that I showed you is stronger when you look in the upper layers of the atmosphere. So there is support for it in terms of the steering as you go even above this layer. That would favor more of a northeast motion. Now, one of the things that it does, I can already see it, is that because we have 2 extra frames here. So now we're at Monday afternoon. You'll notice that the motion turns a little bit more toward the north. So let's see what's going on. Let's go back to that surface map. And by the way, I wanted to emphasize, I'm not sold on this yet, okay? So we're now past day 5. We're in the land of high degree of uncertainty. What I'm trying to do is really just give everybody some sense of context here. You can, I know throughout all day long today, I saw saw posts of people posting up various long-range models, various long-range pictures of weather models. That's not forecasting, okay? It's not forecasting. There's no you don't give it any context. I could draw. All of us can take a map and draw, what we think is going to happen for a certain period of time, put it out there, and say, we'll call it the coffee table model, and say the coffee table model shows that a hurricane is coming to such and such a place. Doesn't mean anything, okay? Because you know how these models behave. The next run is going to have it in a different spot. And by the way, let's remember what happened with Hurricane Irma going into the 10 days before, and how we had all these different landfall points, anywhere from out to sea to Nova Scotia to Portland, Maine, to southern New England, to New York City, to Chesapeake Bay, to Wilmington, North Carolina, and it winds up going in near Naples in southwest Florida, okay? And if I didn't look, but as my memory serves, and sometimes it doesn't serve me well, but in this case I think it does, when we were looking at this in the when we're looking at Irma in the 7 to 10 day time frame, I don't remember a single model showing it going west across the coast of Cuba and turning and then going into southwest Florida. I don't think a single one did. Or maybe I'll give the exception that perhaps one of them might have. Maybe one of the hurricane tracking models did. I don't remember that part. I don't remember, but I do remember that virtually all of the models did not have the where Irma finally wound up. So that's why we got to be really careful with all this when we use it. And when you see it appear elsewhere, remember what Joe said. What is the context? What is really going on in the upper air? So back on this view, you see the loop. We'll see how far it goes. We may have to come back to it. It kind of tries to nudge it a little bit more toward the north, toward the end of the period. But I still think that this would wind up being an out-to-sea solution unless there's some kind of upper air trough that is coming in from the west that wants to pull it back northwestward. So we'll look at that. And by the way, we also, there's probably some weak troughs moving across the jet stream in southern Canada. But whether looking at this, the natural tendency for this is to be kicked out to the northeast. This, if this was right, might be a threat for our friends that are on here for Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. But again, we're talking about 7 days in the long range. So context. So I hope you get the idea. Whoops, wrong one. There you go. So I hope you got the idea of what's going on in the upper atmosphere, at least through the next 4 or 5 days. We have a pretty good handle on what Jose is going to do. Beyond the 5-day period, we've got a lot of questions here. And I'm going to, speaking of questions, there are a couple here. So I'm going to, Rich Rothmansky, you're correct. Anything past 10 days, I would probably take that in and say anything past 7 days, okay, is something that you wouldn't want to spend too much time and energy on. I certainly wouldn't be making decisions on, okay. Oh boy, PRJ Grudge, what a plug that is. Thank you. It's not on the Joe Cioffi channel. It doesn't exist, and everything else is substandard. Thank you so much. That's really kind of you. Why wouldn't the huge upper Atlantic low grab Jose in the next few days? Well, Metavinci, the upper low that's up near Newfoundland is already too far to the east. It actually, if it wasn't for Irma, it probably would have. But because Irma's got this sort of stranglehold on it right now, where part of its circulation, it's kind of caught inside the periphery of Irma's circulation. Irma's holding it down where it is. When Irma weakens enough and that grip is released, that upper low that's east of Newfoundland is now going to be another 500 miles further to the east. It'll be long gone, and it won't be able to do it. And then you got that upper high that's building around it. So I hope that description I just gave you answers your question. Let's see. I'm just trying to make sure I got everybody's question up here. I did see. Wait a minute. Hold on. Here we go. Can the remnants of Irma have an influence on the track? Now I remember the other question that popped up before. No. Well, there's going to be the remnants of Irma. The upper low that represents Irma is going to weaken and move to the east. It doesn't appear that at the moment that would have an immediate effect. That could be what is left of that trough is what shows up, that weakness I showed you on that map. I'll go back to it so we can have some context here. Let me just get to that. Nope, that's not it. That's it. That weakness there, that trough, part of that might be whatever's left of Irma, but it doesn't really show up very well at this point. Irma's long gone here by the time we get to this time frame, which is Saturday evening. And again, I'm showing you the GFS here, 2 runs of the GFS side by side. And again, they look the same. The differences are that the fact that the late afternoon run has this weak trough off the New England coast that kind of creates this weakness here along the East Coast. Jose responds to that by moving into that weakness. When you look at the run before that, that little trough isn't there. It is there, but it's very, very weak. You can barely find it. So it doesn't really have much of an impact other than to draw it northward, but it would get more of a westerly component because the upper highs on both of them are still there and are pretty much of equal strength. The other difference is that the upper high that's over Louisiana is a little stronger here. Okay, so this could be the reason why we saw the UK Met model, the British model, essentially showing that the ridge here is going to be stronger. And to be fair and to be honest, in lieu of what we saw with Irma with the upper high, we can't completely discount that possibility. Okay, I still think the most likely outcome in all of this is that we wind up seeing something out to sea. Now, I saw the question, but all of a sudden I can't seem to find it. Oh, here it is. Iron Mind says, what computer model were you most pleased with regarding with Irma? Well, to tell you the truth, after what we went through this weekend, I looked at so much stuff. It's like after a while, when you look at all of this stuff almost constantly all day long, and then as soon as you've digested one run of the models, lo and behold, a new model run appears. After a while, they all start looking the same. The European, all the models did not do well in the long range. Okay, so let's be fair and honest. Whether you use the European or if you use the GFS, they were not good outside the 4 to 5 day period. The European had Irma going out to sea on two runs during the middle of last week, and that turned out to be dead wrong. The GFS had it all over the place, picking various bays along the East Coast to bring it in, and that was wrong. The UKMET, which I really didn't pay attention to until we got to about 72 hours of the storm, had the track furthest west. So I think the UKMET, and I got to tell you something, the UKMET model does pretty well. I got to give it credit. I like to use it in the wintertime. And I can remember from last winter, there were a couple of instances where the UKMET picked out systems that impacted the East Coast a whole lot better than either the European or the GFS. So I would probably say in hindsight, maybe I should have been paying more attention to the UK Met model. Now, the UK Met model doesn't go out. It's out there somewhere where you can see it out to 144 hours. Admittedly, I did not look at it today, but I did see somebody post a map of that's reliable, so I know it's real. The UKMET. There it is, the 144 hour at the East Coast of Florida. Well, and that's the reason why is that the UKMET really builds that ridge and just strengthens it. And it's the only one that has the ridge as strong as it is. But as I said before, we saw what happened with Irma. We got to be, we can't completely discount the possibility that could wind up being more correct. Because after all, we are looking now at the long range. We can go back to the GFS at this point, and that's not it. That's it. It's got to reload. So just give it a second here, folks. And we should have a little bit more of it. So we're looking at the upper air here, by the way. So although the upper low that's sitting off the East Coast is the representation of Jose. And you can see it takes it out northeast. And for those of you watching from Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and southeastern Canada, you can see there's a trough that starts to approach northern Vermont and Maine. So that picks this up. It could wind up going up toward Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. So maybe you folks might want to keep a side-eye view of this, given what's happening. But tonight's GFS run is out to the east. Doesn't mean it's right. I'll show you the surface so you can see where it is with respect to the coast, and it's well offshore the East Coast on this particular run. When looking back at the past in situations like this, they usually do wind up going out. So I think now the thing to do is just sort of wait till we see what the overnight model runs do of the UK Met and of the European. The European was out to sea today, so the GFS has kind of matched it in terms of what it does. And when we look, by the way, I'm going to show you the satellite here, and you can see the three features in play. And to that question, Iron Mine, you see where the Newfoundland low is? It's already, way out past it. it already missed it. It had its opportunity to get caught by it, but because of the fact that you've got this big upper circulation that reflects Irma continues to just kind of spread out as it starts to, take on the look of more of a non-tropical system. So Jose is still under its influence. So you've got Irma, you have Jose, you've got the storm that's southeast of Nova Scotia and south of Newfoundland here, and Jose is kind of stuck right in the middle. So you can see how the elements in the atmosphere work that allow Jose to just kind of sit still there for a little while. But pretty soon, that grip, as Irma weakens, that grip will be released. The storm that's southeast of Nova Scotia will be even further east, and Jose will just basically get left behind, waiting for a steering pattern to develop and to take it out in whatever direction it winds up taking it. Actually, this is quite a fascinating satellite picture when you think about it, with everything that's going on. You see all the high clouds moving up through Virginia and on up into southern Pennsylvania and Delaware and Maryland and even into southern New Jersey now. Some of the high-level moisture has made it up pretty far to the north with Irma, but none of the rain is going to be a factor here where I am in the Northeast. We may have some showers, running around maybe on Wednesday, but that's about it. I really don't expect too much to happen with regards to the short-range weather going for the rest of the week and into the start of the weekend. Let me see any more questions here tonight. Wasn't Jose supposed to go out to sea in the earlier runs and not last this long? There were a number of the models, Wayne, did pick up, show Jose getting picked up by that storm that's southeast of Newfoundland. But the problem is that Jose wound up going further west, getting into a position where Irma was pulling it to the northwest. And that changed the whole profile of the upper atmosphere. And that's a very good point you bring up, too, from the standpoint of the fact that that was indicated in the long range and wound up not happening. So that's why you have to be careful. Even with the solutions that I'm showing you now with what the models are doing, you got to be a little bit careful because there's one difference right away of what was shown in the long range that turned out to be completely different. There's too much, the amount of variability as you move through time with weather models increases. There are too many players, too many possibilities. The number of possibilities increase over time. When you're inside 72 hours or 48 hours or 36 hours, the possibilities really shrink to almost to a very, very small number. And then they become more subtle, and you have to figure out what the subtleties are. But as you start to go out to day 4, day 5, and then when you start to really go out, day 6, day 7, day 8, day 9, my God, the number of variables that could be different become huge. But it's very difficult to forecast. And again, I just want to say again, this is why when you see somebody throwing up a map of a certain time, 8, 9, 10 days out, as if it were Bible, you should ignore it. If without any context, it doesn't have any value. And it's definitely not forecasting. I don't know what they're doing. Well, I kind of know what they're doing, but what they're not doing is they are not forecasting. Okay, that is clear. Okay, you can put the map up, but you have to give it some meaning. You have to give it some kind of explanation, a context to it. How does it get there? Why does it get there? Those are all, that's what's most important, is to look at the upper air pattern that you have and try to make some sense of it and say, okay, well, I can understand why, it did this because the upper air pattern is such and such. But then you look even deeper and you start to see, well, if this is weaker, if this element is a little weaker and that element is a little stronger, that changes everything. Okay. Anthony Orr, will Jose be retired? I ask this because Irma and Jose are the only two hurricanes in the Atlantic to have winds above 150 miles an hour at the same time. That's a very good. I've been thinking the same thing over the last couple of days, and it may because of that reason. It was almost a Category 5. It just missed. Yes, okay, IG. It is called fear porn. I think there's a good possibility that they will retire. Well, Irma's retired; that's not coming back. But I think they might retire Jose because of the fact that of the two winds at 100, the two storms at the same time at 150 miles an hour, that it never happened, and maybe having another Hurricane Jose it would be a bit confusing. When looking at it in historical standards, tornado. I think I think it's definite that Irma is going to be retired. There's no it was a Category 5 hurricane, which I think if Category 5 hurricanes are automatically retired no matter what, and they are grandstanding. And like Irma, we'll have to wait and see. That is very much correct. And you know what? While we're waiting, why don't we see what the Canadian model has to say, because that the Canadian model is going to do something that's going to be, somewhat squirrely. So let's look and see how much of that is out. The CMC. We don't actually have enough of it out. But I can tell you already, the Canadian today, by the way, the afternoon Canadian run was bizarre because there's Jose moving west and north-northwest by the time we get to the time frame of Saturday morning. It's already moving north-northwest. And by the way, the NAM also takes it north-northwest pretty early. So that's another consideration. Maybe the ridge, this could be an instance where the ridge doesn't build as strongly, in which case you might see that northerly, the more northerly component of motion a little sooner. Another variable to throw into the equation. So this is why you can't. I'm not getting worked up over this at this point. There isn't, if we had a deep trough coming into the eastern part of the United States with a southerly flow setting up, and it was just a matter of depth and position, I might get nervous about this at this point. But from what I'm seeing right now, I'm not nervous, and I'm not really that impressed by all of this, to tell you the truth. So we're just going to have to wait and see. The next several days, is the UCMET onto something, or is it just going to be the more likely solution, where we wind up taking something up and out offshore, and we have swells up and down the East Coast for many more days ahead as the ocean continues to get roughed up. And yes, broken clocks are right twice a day, and that usually is how I approach the Canadian model. And we're already wondering about the European model, which starts in a little over an hour, and I am not staying up for it. So you're gonna have to wait. I'm gonna have to wait till tomorrow morning before we check that out. Do you think that Jose strengthening more than forecast nudge strengthened the high so that it would push Irma further west? That's a possibility, cruise ship man. The outflow could have enhanced the ridge to the north even more. That is a possibility. That Jose's strengthening, which caught a few forecasters by surprise. Even the Hurricane Center's forecast, the 72 and 96 hours for Jose, I don't believe had Jose up at 125, 130 knots. I could remember a few forecasts where they took it to about 95 or 100 knots and then started weakening it before it even got to the Leeward Islands. So that it was grossly underestimated, and I think maybe it did have impact I would have to look back and look a lot closer, but it certainly is a possibility. So if there are no more questions tonight, let's see, just so happens the name Irma was the replacement for Irene. There you go. And now that one's going to be retired. So, of course, next year when the ice storm shows up, everybody's going to say that's going to be a major, because the two eyes that have already been retired in that group. Very interesting. And John Sachs, that was a good little trivia tidbit to offer up. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm really tired. And I went, did a little fishing. I caught some bass. Caught 3 nice little bass, which was good. I had a lot of fun, and got a good breather, which is what I needed. So we will check back with you tomorrow. Maybe I'll live stream tomorrow right before I head out to work, and at Fios One News. And we'll update the day run models and see what they do and what the European did last night. So everybody have a good night and get a good night's sleep and have a safe Tuesday. To those of you who are watching from Florida, I hope everything turned out okay for you, and that recovery will be quick, and that you were safe through the entire event with Hurricane Irma. And we will see you tomorrow. Okay. So good night, all, and see you on Tuesday. It's already Tuesday now because it's 1:45. So we'll see you around noontime tomorrow.